Buenos días. Muy buenos días a todos a esta mesa redonda que
Good
hoy
morning, everyone, to this round table of the International Authors Forum. It is an honor to participate in such an important discussion.
sobre el tema del Instituto del Libro. Me permito simplemente presentar en esta ocasión a Marcelo Guerrieri, quien es un escritor, antropólogo y docente de la licenciatura en Artes de la Escritura de la Universidad Nacional de las Artes de Buenos Aires. Es autor de varias novelas, entre ellas Con esta luna, Farmacia y El ciclista serial, por la que recibió en 2005 el premio Nueva Narrativa Sudaca y fue finalista del premio Nueva Novela Página 12. Tiene también publicado el libro de cuentos titulados Árboles de Tronco Rojo y varios relatos en antologías y revistas literarias. Marcelo es actualmente el presidente de la Unión Argentina de Escritoras y Escritores de ese país. Y es la organización con la que en esta ocasión el Foro Internacional de Autores está convocando a esta mesa redonda. Simplemente me permito recordarles a todos los que nos están acompañando el día de hoy que tendremos la posibilidad de interpretación simultánea y doy igualmente la bienvenida y agradezco a Marita.
And I welcome Marita and Nieves, who will be behind the microphones. It's been a pleasure to greet you this morning, and I turn it over to Marcelo Guerrieri. Good morning, good afternoon, those who are on the other side of the ocean. On behalf of the Writers Union, it is a pleasure to coordinate this event that we have been organizing for quite a few months. Writing in post-pandemic times, which is a title that we have come up with in connection with writers and producers of contents for the publishing industry. And this is something that is relevant to all of us, to be able to engage in a discussion among other countries that are currently present today. All of these discussions started as a result of our interest to push the creation of the National Book Institute. It is a flag that we have been bearing from the Argentine Writers Union for quite some time, because we believe that the government needs to have public policies to foster writing and publishing for the medium and long term. In speaking with the IAF people, we share with them our interest and the need for the IAF to support us in this claim, and we started to find out where there were book institutes in other countries with similar experiences and what was government support like in other countries. So we thought that it would be an interesting talk and a way to push this project, i.e. to think how in different environments authors are supported by governments. To kick off this talk, I'll be the facilitator of this talk, and I'd like to share with you what the situation in Argentina is, so that after that, each one of you, Ndongolera, Carlos, John, and advisor to the Senator, Cecilia, Cristina, who's here with us, to share similarities, analogies, differences in your countries, and things that we can discuss as a group. So based on this structure for today's session, let me start from the basics. How do writers make a living as authors? Because we are thinking of writers as producers, factor of the publishing industry factor, not an addition. So that's the first item that the union would like to point out. And this is something that we have been supporting. The writer is part of the publishing industry. It is a factor in the publishing industry. Within the publishing industry, it is the weakest link, the one that gets paid the least or the latest, and very little. An author builds his work. It is a craftsman's job, as you all know. It is a job that resists to the capitalist logic in terms of number of hours to produce a good. An novel requires research. Sometimes the texts need to rest and it takes years for them to come to light. This job is similar to that of a research scientist who, after some time, we don't know how long that will be, a work appears that is available to be published in the publishing industry. That preliminary work, that craftsman's work, is not paid by anyone. Writers are paid based on their sales. 10% of the cover price is paid to them in the best of cases, usually every 6 months, and that's how it's ruled by the publishing industry. So who pays for that preliminary time? For example, if the book doesn't sell well. In the case of Argentina, and that's why I'm presenting this as a starting point for this session, it is paid by the writer by buying time to write by doing other jobs. Sometimes the jobs are related to literature, in the best of cases, teaching, workshops, interviews, and talks. But in terms of writing production, that first part is paid by the writer by doing other jobs. So book diversity or bibliodiversity, which is a concept used for thinking about publishing houses. Bibliodiversity is a concept whereby diversity of voices is fostered in the publishing process. Where does bibliodiversity start? Because if writers can write only when they can buy time for working as writers, how many voices are left out of the publishing industry? How many voices are left out of the building of the cultural identity of a country because they belong to social classes that do not have these characteristics that I mentioned a moment ago, i.e. the writers that need to do something else for a living to buy time, or if they belong to well-off classes who can write because they do other things for a living. So giving this structural landscape of writers in terms of book producers, we believe that a book institute is key to promote the work of authors and to foster this for the medium and long term. If doing this themselves, given their job precariousness, it is them. If the market doesn't do it, then it's the government that needs to do it. And that's why we have been insisting on the creation of the National Book Institute. This project has been trying to come to light for quite a few years. Until recently, the Writers Union did not exist. And there wasn't an association that would think of writers as workers, which would defend their rights in different environments, i.e. vis-a-vis the government. So the previous versions of the Book Institute creations that didn't come to light, but where there was discussion at Congress on different occasions, put writers in a secondary sphere. Writers didn't have a voice in the board of publishing houses. The budget for fostering writers' production didn't take into account grants for book creation. So we started to engage in discussions with different senators and representatives so that this bill, I'm talking about one that was submitted in 2019, so that this bill would include all these issues that I'm touching upon today in connection with the writer as workers. We were listened to on the one hand, we encountered barriers on the other hand. And so we understood that constant activism is the only way for our voice to be heard, and so that this bill includes writers. This is how we took on to defend this being the voice of writers. The other project wasn't sent to the House last year, so it was forgotten. So we have started to strive for a new bill to be discussed. We started to hold meetings with publishing houses and booksellers and culture promoters and librarians, all the different stakeholders of the publishing industry to see what needs to be changed in that bill to submit it again so that it comes back to light. So in this sense, we believe that a book institute needs to consider the writer as a worker, and it needs to have a specific amount allocated to authors' production. And together with Lopez, Valverde's senator's team, we have been discussing there's 40% of the budget of the Book Institute in this bill that would go for authors, production, and support for writers, which wasn't part of the previous bill. Also, the board of the National Book Institute would be at an arm's length of publishers. So there would be 2 representatives for publishers, 2 for writers, also translators and booksellers would form part of the board, which wasn't the case in the previous bill, in that balance of forces in the decision-making space. And another interesting element is to think that the Book Institute is an entity for creating public policies for the medium and long term. It's not a public policy in itself. So based on these discussions with the different stakeholders of the publishing industry, as well as the senator's team, we came up with a bill, and we have some news which Cecilia Lanfranco will surely share with you in a moment. So that's the basic structure of our discussion. The role of writers as workers, how they make a living as authors and book producers, and what the relationship is between the government support for authors' production in each country, as well as any other aspect that you would like to add to this proposed discussion. Let me introduce the people who are in this panel, who are going to deliver talks. John Degen is the Executive Director of the Canadian Writers Union and President of the International Authors Forum, IAF, an organization representing more than 700,000 authors around the world. He's a poet and novelist who has published 3 books. He has worked for many years as a cultural manager and advocate of public policies on cultural topics. He participated as a literature official at the Arts Council of Ontario, where he managed a $4 million funding budget for writers, publishers, and literary agents of Ontario. And he was active in the expansion of the scope of the concession of that office to Indigenous communities and the north of Ontario. His essays and opinions have been published in various and major Canadian publications. Ndongolera Mwangupili, he's an outstanding poet and a prose writer in Malawi. His first poem collection, Fragments of My Broken Voice, is his recent publication. He works as higher inspector of schools in Malawi. He's a founding member of the MUANA, where he's currently the vice president. Carlos Anaya, he has more than 50 years experience in the publishing sector, where he has combined with his passion for teaching. Until 2020, he was the vice president of Noriega Editores Group, and for 30 years, he was the production director. He's the president of the University of Science and Arts, UNICAL. He was member of a task force promoting a reform of the law for fostering reading and books in order to include the figure of bookstores, for them to have a 0 VAT rate, as well as the other book chain links. He has promoted a compensation proposal for authors by private copy, and he has presented proposals for the creation of a book institute. He was president of the National Chamber of the Mexican Publishing Industry. He received a merit medal in 2013. He's currently vice president of the Coalition for Legal Access to Culture, an organization that groups and advocates for authors' rights in Mexico. Cecilia Lanfranco, who's representing Senator Lopez Valverde, who's the president of the Culture Commission of the Senate. She's a political scientist of the University of Buenos Aires, also holds a master's degree in sociology, and she's part of Senator Cristina Lopez Valverde's advisory team. Who's the president of the Educational Culture Commission of the Argentine Senate. Having introduced the speakers, let me turn it over to whoever would like to continue. All my colleagues of the panel, we had an order for the talks. John Degen will be the next speaker, according to my list.
Yep, that's great. Can everyone hear me? It looks that way. Good morning, everyone from Canada. And I will be speaking mainly about Canada, even though I'm also representing the International Authors Forum, so authors groups around the world. But my familiarity, obviously, is mainly with Canada. And thank you, Marcelo, for the interesting information about Argentina. Slightly different story in Canada. We have, over the last half century at least, very carefully and deliberately constructed an ecosystem architecture of many different supports and mechanisms to support writing and publishing in Canada, and to build a healthy domestic publishing industry so that Canadian books can be a focus within Canada. We benefit from and are also slightly threatened by the fact that our closest neighbor is the gigantic United States. And I say gigantic in terms of population and market size. It's 10 times larger than Canada, even though our geographic size is larger than the United States. Population-wise, we are the mouse to their elephant, which is the standard metaphor here in Canada. So let me talk about a little bit about some of those mechanisms that I talked about. To begin with, we have something called the Canada Council for the Arts, which provides buying time grants. So Marcelo, you were talking about buying time and how artists often have to subsidize that time themselves towards the domestic production. That is also true in Canada. Not everybody gets a buying time grant, but there is that mechanism in place, and they do have a budget dedicated towards writers in Canada for the creation of literature and books. On the publishing side, there's something through our Department of Canadian Heritage called the Canada Book Fund, which provides focused funding towards publication of Canadian books, and again, only Canadian owned and operated and located publishers are eligible for that funding. And as well, we are one of the countries in the world that benefits from a public lending right, which is a compensation towards authors when our books are collected and used in public libraries. So that's a helpful mechanism. And I understand that Canada is really the only country in the Americas who has the public lending right. So we have joined PLR International, and we are encouraging the spread of this mechanism throughout the Americas because it really has been incredibly helpful for the construction of our domestic industry. I mentioned the Canada Council for the Arts. With the creation of that funding mechanism on a national level, all of our provinces then created, well, most of our provinces then created their own provincial arts bodies to do the same sort of work. And it has even filtered down often to the municipal level. So larger cities like Toronto and Vancouver in Canada actually have their own municipal arts councils that fund creation as well. And you mentioned in my introduction, in my bio, that I did work for the Ontario Arts Council, which is the province that I live in Canada. I worked there for a number of years and administered a lot of those grants towards writing and publishing. So I'm very aware of just how vital and necessary this funding is for our domestic industry. As well, we have sort of a special circumstance in Canada in that we're a bilingual country. We're really two official nations in one, many official nations in one. In fact, when you consider all the indigenous nations in Canada, but the province of Quebec has its own domestic publishing industry, which is focused on French language production. And they even have a mechanism in place that sort of directs the purchase of their domestic books for the purpose of education. So it's a wonderful system of encouraging educational institutions and school boards in Quebec to use the production of Quebec books that comes from the province. We don't have that mechanism in English Canada. We would love to have it in English Canada. It's one of the things we talk to our government about quite often. And just to give you an illustration, so that's a very positive story from Canada, the building of this ecosystem over the last 50, 60 years. But just to give you an idea of just how delicate and vulnerable such an ecosystem is and can be, over the last 10 years in Canada, we've seen the destruction of our educational market in the English language side of Canada because of copying, of photocopying and scanning, all of which done for the purposes of education used to be licensed. So income used to flow back to publishers and to writers from this use. And since a sort of a clumsy change to our copyright law back in 2012, all of that income has diverted from the writing and publishing market in Canada. It's been a minimum $200 million loss to our sector. And as I said, we're a very small population, very small market. $200 million is a gigantic amount. And really has greatly damaged the writing and publishing sector in all of Canada. So even though we have this wonderful story of building up the ecosystem, we're also a terrible illustration of how vulnerable and delicate such an ecosystem is and how it can be damaged by clumsy public policy. So I guess we're a good example and a bad example. And I'll leave it at that and wait for any questions if they come.
Bueno, muchas gracias, John.
Thank you, John. There are so many things that we hear about the Canadian experience that really encourage us to design analogies for our country. And this is a great opportunity for exchange in order to learn from other countries' opportunities. Now, I will turn it over to Carlos Anaya. I already introduced him. He is a representative of culture in Mexico. Thank you, Marcelo, and good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. It is very interesting for me to participate in this session because the title has to do with a problem we have all had in common, which is the pandemic. As John was saying, these problems have to do not just with the educational perspective. The pandemic has shown the strengths and the weaknesses of the publishing sector and writers. Society has become resilient or stronger in order to continue developing their activities even when they were under strict isolation measures. So, in this case, writing has been fundamental to weather the storm. So this should set governments thinking about the importance of written culture. If this is not proof enough, then I do not know what it is, because we need to work on this idea of the Book Institute. Now, before I go further, I would like to add some considerations to what John has said. I believe that most national states have certain support mechanisms for writers, which is insufficient, of course, and oftentimes there are intermediaries, and I'm sorry if I'm offending someone here, but sometimes the intermediaries are mafia organizations. So these possibilities to access funding, grants, there are people who have been applying for them for years and they will never get them. And there are others that get that opportunity instantly. So I believe this happens, and this has to do with this capitalist idea or romantic idea of the writer and the translator as someone who is the big victim that has to suffer because he or she is writing. And this is like a pastime or hobby or a need to express themselves. And nobody wants to recognize that a writer or a translator are workers. They are workers, the same as a carpenter or a plumber. So they deserve being paid for their work, being compensated for their work. I don't see a carpenter that has to paint a house in order to build a piece of furniture. However, the writer has to teach and buy time in order to have time to write a book. And we all feel that this is what writers are subject to. They have to do it. And when I say we all feel it, I also mean the publishers. The publishers are no friends with writers, but they should be, because the writer is the first and fundamental link of the value chain of books. If there is no author, if there is no writer, then there is no book, there is no industry. So if the writer is not there, there is no industry. I believe this need to strengthen writers, performers, and translators is fundamental. And I'm sorry, I'm digressing. I will speak a little bit more about the main topic. What I was saying is the publishing industry in Latin America, and let me talk about Latin America, but I also see representatives from Africa and Asia going through the same troubles that we have in Latin America. The problem is that here, the industry is controlled by big multinational publishing companies that are only interested in bestsellers, immediate sales, and it is a voracious machine that seeks to make money with new books, new catalogs, and the authors suffer because they have spent years on a project, but overnight they tell the authors that their books have been left out of the catalog, and any remaining copies can be sold at cost. So the books end up being destroyed. And this is unfortunate, that someone's life work will be dumped in such a way just because the apparatus of the free market rules so demand. So in Argentina, as far as I know, shows that this problem exists, but it has associations, 3 associations of writers. There is the big league in one of the associations, then there is the indie Writers Association or smaller Writers Association. And in Mexico, this is what I wanted to share with you. We have different organizations that advocate for authors' rights. Maria Fernanda is one of the organizers of this event, and she is an example of a leader. She directed the Copyright Center in Mexico. She worked very hard in order to convince writers, and she also got literary translators on board as part of this center, recognizing that translators also have the right to be recognized for their authorial work. So there is this misunderstanding about writers' work. The Mexican state created some initiatives. The most relevant one was the law to encourage reading and books. However, this piece of legislation is only intended to regulate the market. Mexico had, for some time, in 1976, there was a committee for the promotion of the publishing business, but it ignored authors because they did not recognize their major role. However, it was an important tool to promote culture, including print media. Today, this has to be modified or reformed. There is a need for a book institute that will cover all the links in the value chain, from the writer to the reader and everyone in between, and everyone should be involved in this institute. Now that we have this objective digital threat, this is increasingly relevant. In Mexico, in 1994, we started to promote the copyright law that advocates for copyright. And a compensatory or a compensation for private copies was established. This means that the writer is entitled to compensation. If someone downloads a copy of a book, for instance, the author should be recognized. It is unacceptable that everyone else will benefit from it, but the author. So there is an initiative to regulate this compensation for writers. Now, the law of 1994 did not mention who should be liable for paying the copyright. So this gap in the law has to be addressed. In 2020, we worked with congresspeople in 2020 and 2021 so as to regulate this. Who should pay for those rights? The manufacturers of electronic devices should be liable for paying that compensation. That is our idea. We did not have full information regarding of what that amount could be. The devices, of course, opposed. The device manufacturers opposed this initiative because the amount was 4 billion Mexican pesos, which is approximately $200 million. That it was the estimated amount that device manufacturers would have to pay, because this is calculated based on the benefits or earnings they get. Smartphones and devices, the original function was to be a device for communication to help two people talk. But today they have so many features and functions that people hardly talk with phones. They download music, books, videos. This is the audio, video, image, and text sector of the industry. So a cell phone or a mobile phone has the costs, has its current costs because of all these functionalities. There are 74 countries around the world that have already regulated this, and there is this compensation right that is recognized in England, France, Spain. These are some countries in Europe I'm mentioning which already regulate this, and the device manufacturers have to pay. We have demonstrated that a mobile phone in Spain is less expensive than in Mexico, and it already includes compensation for authors. However, in Mexico, cell phones are more expensive and they do not include compensation for authors. It is in Spain, legislators have more weight and they were successful in negotiating with the device manufacturers, but it did not happen in Mexico. The Book Institute would be a policy-making body. It would be a driver or an engine for policy-making. A Book Institute would help to have this sort of mechanism where the technology stakeholders and big companies such as Amazon would come into the loop and respect the channels that are being affected or impacted today. When the publishing houses go directly to the schools, to give you an example, when they are ignoring bookstores, then there is a huge impact. And also, the diversity is being harmed because knowledge becomes a silo-like model. So the books that are published in Argentina never reach Mexico. Books published in Mexico never reach Argentina. So this goes against this international exchange that should happen. Now, to conclude, I would say that the law should promote the strict right for all rights and for all writers and translators to be compensated for their work. Their work is a job. It's not a pastime. It's not a hobby. If there is a writer who can write as a pastime, well, so good for them, but that is not the role model of the writer. Famous writers, I'm sure that they had to go through lots of trouble, and we have very clear examples. One day, by chance, they became successful, but before that, they did not have enough money to make a living. Thank you very much, and I am available for questions and comments. Thank you. Thank you, Carlos. Your presentation has been extremely interesting, and the relationships that we can build between our countries, the idea of a book institute that would encompass the industry as a whole, because it is not useful to focus just on one part of the industry. It is a coordinated effort. And also the rights that device manufacturers should pay to remunerate or compensate authors for their work, and the author associations should have a role of monitoring how those compensations are paid. I'm sure we will continue exchanging experiences and knowledge.
Let's pass on to the next speaker, Ndongolera, who's a writer and vice president of the Academic Writers Association in Malawi.
No se te escucha.
We can't
Thank
hear you.
very
You're on
much.
mute.
Yeah. Thank you very much for giving me the chance to speak in this discussion. My presentation is I shared my presentation, so I think I'll bring it here so that I present it to all of us. I started my presentation, the work of writing post-pandemic, Malawian view. As I was already said, I am a writer for Malawi and the vice president of Malawi Union of Academic and Nonfiction Authors. So my presentation centers on these areas. I'll provide a background to Malawi in terms of where are we as writers, where are we coming from, and where are we? And then also look at writers working with COSOMA and other stakeholders. COSOMA is Copyright Society of Malawi. And apart from that, then also look at the maze of the book industry, where the writer seems to be lost in this maze of the book industry. Then also look at the future of writing and provide a conclusion from the Malawian perspective. So that's what I'm going to present. Let me provide the background from Malawi. Malawi is a country from in Africa, Southern Africa. We are between Tanzania, Zambia, and Mozambique, somewhere there. Maybe not popularly known because we haven't been into any war kind of to hit international media and all that. Quite peaceful country, small country, very peaceful. We come from a background where the government centralized the book industry. Because in the past we had a dictator who controlled everything. So the book industry was at first very centralized. From 1964, when we got independence, to 1992, it was very much centralized by the government system. So we had the government press. You could not just print any book anywhere. You had to do that in the government press. Then apart from that, we also had the Malawi Institute of Education. This was the only institute that was printing textbooks for across all levels of education. Then we are also coming from strict censorship. We had the censorship board where you couldn't write anything without the censorship board saying you can bring this to the public. So, however, come 1992, when we had some kind of a revolution, a democracy coming in, we had seen mushrooming of private publishing companies after 1992. And again, that is the year when the Copyright Society of Malawi was formed, 1992. We can say that currently we're struggling to have our public lending rights program, as well as a book policy. We don't have a book policy. And this is where I found that maybe where Argentina is talking about the book institute is very central to this. And again, we have a problem there for us that we are struggling. We are still in the negotiation for these two areas, which are very critical for compensating the author, to make sure that the author can gain something through the writing. So how do we work with COSOMA and other stakeholders? So COSOMA is a recognized public institution under a parliamentary act. So it was registered under an act of parliament. It is under the Ministry of Culture, Tourism and Wildlife. However, it also collaborates with other key ministries like the Ministry of Education, because that is very central to buying textbooks and other books. And apart from that, Ministry of Justice, in terms of making sure that we have the laws that support the copyright and other related laws within it. So it collaborates very much with those two ministries. As writers, we register with COSOMA as individuals, as well as an association. That is through the Copyright Act of 2019. I personally, I am registered as an individual with COSOMA, as well as, since I'm the vice president of this association of writers, it means through the association, which is registered with COSOMA, I'm also registered with the association. So you can choose to belong to the association or to do it as an individual. I, for one, I do it in both ways. COSOMA as an individual, as well as through an association, so that together as writers, we can air out our views and be supported very well if you speak together as a team. So through COSOMA, writers have interface meetings with all these stakeholders. It's easy for us to meet the Ministry of Education to talk and see how they can support our book industry, as also to lobby with Ministry of Justice if we need some change of laws and the policies through that. So we have that chance. We are not saying it's easy, it's a challenge. We always struggle to do that. So we keep on having interface meetings with these stakeholders through COSOMA, and also as an association that is registered with the Copyright Society of Malawi. So the demise of the book industry. For Malawi, very few Malawians buy books. It's a challenge. This hasn't been the case even before COVID-19. It has always been a problem for us to have individuals buying books. So we struggle to sell our books through, it's really a big challenge. Why? Because you understand that Malawi is a very poor country. For an individual to say, let me buy a book, it's not easy. They have to, it means they're sacrificing from their personal needs. And they say, let me buy a book. So with this absence of book policy makes publishing a challenge in Malawi. We find that most publishing companies in Malawi, they would prefer to have their books printed in India rather than to print them in Malawi. They would rather go to South Africa and print them. It's cheaper than to order materials from outside and have them printed in Malawi. So we find that this can be answered very well when we have the book policy. So we are struggling to really convince the government that we have a book policy that can iron out the challenges that we face in the book industry. And it means the writer is challenged very much, because the writer is already doesn't have the financial muscle than the publishers. So the victim in the whole book industry becomes the one who has written the material. So that is one area that we have. So again, apart from that, we don't have PERR program yet, but through COSOMA, we are seriously considering its implementation. We have started steps to make sure that this is one area that we can look at. So most books get published without a signed contract. We have a challenge in Malawi, where publishers will prefer to play around with authors, because authors don't have the financial muscles. They'll play around with them and give them a little something. Then authors continue having their books published without a signed contract. So as an association and as individuals and through COSOMA, we struggle to make sure that publishers and all stakeholders in the book industry should understand that there's a need for a signed contract. So these are some thorny areas we struggle with as authors in Malawi. The future of writing. We are seriously looking at public rendering right as a process for compensating authors. As already alluded to, there is little buying power. But our books are found in schools, they are found in libraries, they are found in other places. Why can't we find a way that authors could be compensated by the few books that are accessible? In a way, the government should compensate authors, and this is through public lending right. That's why we are finding this as a process that we should make sure that we have this in place. We are also looking forward to having a book policy. Through the book policy, we hope for government buying certain specific number of copies of a book. If I publish a book, we hope that if we have a book policy, we'll pin the government that if this book is released, can the government buy a specific number of books? So in so doing, we're boosting the selling power. We're boosting the buying power, so the government can buy and put it in schools and in other institutions. Apart from that, we feel again we can also have reduced levy for materials for publishing books locally. As already alluded to, it's easier to publish a book, to have a book printed in India than have it printed in Malawi. Why? Because the materials required for that are not cheap if we have to bring them to Malawi. So we are trying to say, can the government have a way of having reduced levy for such kind of materials that can support the book industry? So this we hope will boost the book industry in Malawi. And again, in so doing, support the writer. That is the direction we're trying to make sure that we take and see that the writer is assisted. Let me conclude by saying COSOMA, working with copyright holders, work tirelessly to promote our interests in political corridors. We really do that. We struggle. We make sure that COSOMA support us and we support each other to make sure that our voice is heard in the political corridors. It is not easy to win political will. Lobbying must always continue. Those in political power also want to see what the government gains in the system or program proposed. So always when we come to a table in our discussion with our members of parliament, with our ministers, we also try to make sure that through what we are proposing, the government will benefit something. The law itself will benefit the government in one way or the other by promoting the book industry. So always argue that a policy or a law will also benefit the nation and the government. So we find that to be something, a carrot that we dangle in front of them to make sure that they understand that what we are proposing is not like we're stealing from government, but we're supporting the government policies and making sure that government can gain through our proposals that we bring on the table. So that is my presentation. Unless there are questions, I am here to get the questions and support any idea that may come across. Thank you very much for your attention.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, Ndongolera.
Thank you very much, Ndongolera. It's been a pleasure to listen to you and also to identify that there's common ground, that books should be a human right. Access to books is a human right. And it is key for governments through a law to understand this. There should be democratic access to books. This is something to be taken into account. That's why the National Book Institute that we are promoting should have that as its mainstay. If the government doesn't do it, the market will not do it. As you very well said, Ndongolera, low-income populations have to sacrifice many other needs if they want to access books. That's why the idea of having a book institute that thinks books as a human right is key to be promoted by governments. Thank you very much, and we will continue thinking about different things together. Our next speaker is Cecilia Lanfranco, who's advisor to Senator Cristina del Carmen Lopez Valverde. As I said a moment ago, we have been working with them on a new bill to create the Book Institute, building on our previous attempts, with enhancements, taking the writer at the center. And surely she will have important news to share with us. You have the floor.
Marcelo, buenos
Thank you very
días.
much, Marcelo. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. First off, I'd like to thank the invitation from the Argentine Writers Union. Senator Cristina Lopez Valverde sends her apologies. Argentina is about to complete the sessions, the ordinary sessions. The senator's agenda is quite busy because we are ending these ordinary sessions. So I will try to represent her as best as I can and share with you the news. We would like to celebrate these meetings. I heard the previous speakers and I took lots of ideas. I have been working on legislative issues for quite some time, so I already have a good sense for spotting interesting initiatives. The speaker from Canada has shared interesting policies, which is something that we could probably roll out to Argentina. Senator Cristina Lopez Valverde is the president of the Education and Culture Commission of the Senate. She has quite an endeavor to take care of education and culture amidst a pandemic. We took office during the pandemic, and it's been quite difficult because these were two of the sectors that were the most affected because of the lockdown. So since the senator took office, it's been clear to her that she wanted to work to help the Argentine cultural and educational sectors. And this has supported the work of the executive branch and the Ministry of Culture. We are aware of their efforts made to federalize culture. The senator comes from the province of San Juan, which is a province in the Cuyo region bordering Chile. So I am from the city of Buenos Aires, but we always try to create medium and long-term policies, supporting these policies towards the federalization of culture. So with this in mind, at the beginning of this year, we contacted the Writers Union. We were aware of the bills that had been previously submitted to the lower house under Daniel Filmus, who's the current Minister of Science and Technology. So we took on this project and we contacted the union because we believed that there were some things that we could pick up and start building based on them. So we worked jointly with them. I thank Marcelo and Marines for their work, and they have provided us with strong support. We need a lot of support from experts because it's impossible for us to be aware of all specificities. So it's really been very helpful to work with them, with the different sectors from civil society. Last week, it was submitted to the Senate, and we are waiting for the file number for this bill to create the Argentine Book Institute. So we are really very happy about this, and we believe that the submission of this bill has come to compensate for a loss that we have had, that Argentine democracy had a debt to the book industry, because there's the National Music Institute and the National Theatre Institute and the National Film Institute. And there are two sectors that we were indebted to. One is dance and the other has to do with the publishing industry. So we are celebrating the fact that this bill was submitted because we want to pay off this debt. Together with the union, with the writers' unions, we have been working on the entire book value chain, and the purpose is to democratize and federalize access to books, to foster book production throughout Argentina. There is a board of directors, a federal assembly, and a representative committee. This representative committee, we submitted to the Writers Union some modifications because some bills had already been submitted to the lower house, including translators, and we wanted to include them in this committee to cater for the demand. So this representative committee that will help in the decision-making process will include booksellers and translators and authors and publishers, and we wanted the Institute to represent all these sectors that are related in the book chain. And we also tried to work jointly with already existing bodies in Argentina, such as the Arts Fund or the Popular Library Committee, which are bodies that have been working for quite a few years and they have a very strong track record.
Finally, what we always try to do at the Communication and Culture Commission is to make culture truly federal. We have had great authors. They have been great ambassadors of the city of Buenos Aires, particularly, but we want writers to be represented all over Argentina, all over the provinces. The book should be an instrument of culture throughout the territory. And also this matter about buying time. Who can afford buying time? Who can afford writing and waiting for compensation to come? There are young authors, for instance, in the provinces that are waiting for opportunities. We want to encourage them all. We want to have provincial, federal stories throughout the country. We want them to be ambassadors at the domestic level and at the international level, accessing other markets and having opportunities for exchange. I would like to thank you for your time, for the work at the Writers Union and the commitment to submit this bill. And we are here available to help and to hear any suggestions. This has been an enlightening process, and on behalf of the Culture Commission at the Senate, next year we are interested in having conversations about this and having discussions. The first step is very important, which is to have a docket as part of its parliamentary status. So we have started the process already. I was also thinking about the public lending right and the educational use of books. So this should be the starting point for many other policies that should be articulated in order to strengthen the sector. It is very interesting for us to work on this. So I thank all the panelists for sharing their experiences with us. And please count on us. And thank you, Marcelo. Cecilia. Let us celebrate with a big round of applause for the submission of this very important bill for authors. We had great expectations, and having the announcement made in this context gives extra value to this meeting, because as you're saying, it is about joint work between associations, in this case, writers, and government entities, so that everyone will do his or her own part. This Writers Association is also a member of the International Authors Forum, which is an international association, with global reach. So this is even more empowering for us. It is great news. It is interesting news, and it is transformational and disruptive for the publishing business in our country. I'm sure there will be many lectures and interviews that will be triggered by this big announcement. Please thank the senator for her help in this. As regards timekeeping, we are doing marvelously, and now we have some time for Q&A. So the Q&A session is now open for participants. Maria Fernanda has just written a question. So congratulations, and could you please explain to us what the next steps are in order to have this law? Well, I am sorry for the ambient noise here, because I'm in a place where there is a demonstration in the street. So the next steps, so that this will be enacted into a law, we have now taken the first steps. It already has a docket or a folder. Now, there are several committees or task forces that will be working on this bill so that it is enacted into law. I am sure that the budget committee will also be involved, because there is a budgetary consideration here. So there is a number of advisors that will take part in the discussions. Writers, associations, translators, bookstores, publishers, they will all be convened in order to exchange ideas in these advisory meetings. Once that step is over, there will be a draft that will be submitted to the Senate. This draft will be signed, and once there are more than 10 or more than 10 signatures, it will be open for discussion at the Senate. Once it is discussed at the Senate, it will have half approval or a half adoption, then it will go to the House of Representatives or the deputies. It will be discussed, it will have the other half adoption, and then it comes back to the Senate. It is a long journey, but it is not impossible. And once it goes back to the Senate, then it will be made into law. Okay, we will make noise. We will make sure we will make noise as we can hear the demonstrators today, which I think are the nurses that are demonstrated where you are. Now, Carlos, thank you. In the first place, congratulations for this big step forward. Having this initiative of the Book Institute is extremely important, and it is the starting point. And now the hard work comes. You need to get on board many other stakeholders who are interested in this initiative. For instance, the senator, as the one who proposed this bill, should have support. Having support is fundamental in order to achieve progress. Inevitably, there will be resistance. I'm speaking out of experience in Mexico. Congress in Mexico also faces resistance, and it usually has to do with the economic factor. So it is very important for you to have a clear idea of the costs or the budgets in order to understand all the implications, in order to overcome that big hurdle when the Treasury or the budgetary committee addresses the expenditure that the state will have to invest, and also point out that this is not an expense, it is an investment. So terminology is important here. A book institute should not be considered an expense, it should be considered an investment in the culture and development of the country. What makes a country different, or a distinctive advantage of a country in this integrated world, is culture, precisely. Culture is what differentiates countries. Culture is what calls everyone's attention in order to build dialogue. People may share ideas, but they may also have a diversity of cultures. So, Cecilia, congratulations for this big and bold step forward. Also, the Argentine Writers Union, congratulations for this bold step. And of course, count on me if we can give a helping hand. Why? Because it is worth the while. Creating a book institute in Argentina will have reverberations, and it will be taken as an example in other countries. In Mexico, there was a project in the past, it was forgotten, and we have a country with 7,200 public libraries, but the budget is good enough only for 200. The other 7,000 live on donations. So it is very important to take this into consideration. What is the point of building a huge library if there are no funds for enlarging the book collection? So I believe this is an example of what needs to be done and the challenges that will have to be overcome. I believe that you have to work very closely, and if there are any differences in opinion between the associations, please set them aside and join forces and have a common front when you address Congress. Thank you very much for your encouragement for this next stage. As you very well said, this has to do with the political side or the political support for the project. This means going out into the street and going to the media and getting the support it deserves. So remember, there is space for questions. I don't know if any participant would like to make questions. I have questions if nobody else has them. So there are some comments. We are attentively listening to all opinions, and also all links in the book production value chain should be involved. Estela from the Translators Association of Argentina. Okay, so I was thinking about something you said, which has to do with public lending rights. That is something that we have not thought about, so it resonates with me. My question for the three of you, John, Carlos, and Ndongolera, what elements should be included in a law based on your experience, what are the fundamental points that shouldn't be absent from this law? What contributions can you give us from your country's experience?
I'll jump in immediately and just say that I think, I mean, there's all sorts of different designs for public lending right around the world, and I think you would want to design it according to your own sort of domestic library system. But I think key to any successful design is that the money for the public lending right mechanism comes directly from government and is not attached to separate money for library budgets. When there is that attachment, then libraries feel threatened by the public lending right, and the whole mechanism sort of breaks down. So I think you have to be clear when building such a mechanism that it's a support for authors and sometimes publishers, and it's not in any way damaging to library systems.
Yeah, I can come in, I think, from Malawi again. I think because we are in the process, in Malawi, we are in the process of doing that. Not that we have the public lending rights program yet, but we're in the process. And I think the most key part is that, as we are robbing, is that we are in the, we are looking at the public libraries as a system where we can collect the data of how many books are being used, and not that the libraries have to fund this. It's the government that through the budget should have a special budget that should be directed to this, to support writers through public lending rights. So that's why we have had a lot of talks with library, and they were already the Library Association of Malawi is already supporting this. And now it's up now to the Minister of Justice to have already talked with them to make sure that this becomes a law. So I think that should be very clear. And I think we have very much got some information again through which we have seen that it is something. I think Canada is one good area. I think country that has done this very well. I think so. I would say that should be the process that should be looked at. I'm not sure whether Argentina has a book policy. It's also an area that should be seriously considered, I think, within that. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Ndongolera. Sí, la Argentina tiene una...
Thank you very much. Argentina has a network of popular libraries. It has a long-standing history in our country, and it is exemplary in its functioning. However, writers have been left out of the picture. So, based on our union's efforts, we have started to disseminate through talks and conferences by writers at the national libraries or public libraries in order to disseminate the importance of reading, for instance. Together with the Popular Library Association, the Writers Association has been supporting this kind of initiative, working together. However, we are conscious that public rights should not be impacted. And I'm also interested in what Carlos mentioned regarding compensation based on the income of device manufacturers. Perhaps a source of revenue that the Book Institute should consider. Okay, there is silence in the Q&A box. However, I wouldn't want to monopolize the questions. So I would like to turn it over to Carlos, John, Ndongolera, and Cecilia so that they can say some final remarks and we can say goodbye. Do you believe this is a good idea? Yes. Thank you. Yes, I believe it is a great idea. Thank you. In Mexico, public lending right should be compensation to authors and publishers. It is not present now. There is a new library network bill, but it has been challenged and it has not been adopted. We don't know how it will turn out at this point. There are 7,200 libraries. This means an average of, we have 2,400 municipalities. So this means there are more than 3 libraries per municipality. However, this is not true because there are cities that have many libraries, and there are other cities that only have a small library. And for elementary education, there was a public policy introduced in 1959 that enabled developing education. The implementation of this policy was not correct because this makes the books go directly, the books that are copied go directly to students. They do not go through bookstores, and this is a mistake. We have 126 million inhabitants, to give you a perspective. So from the point of view of the basic elements of the law, I am sure you're contemplating this already, but I would like to mention in the first place, recognition for creative work, writers and translators. And this should be evident and clear recognition. This should be the trigger for all of this work. The law should also contemplate reading habits with a national public library program, fiscal or tax incentives for the publishing industry. The publishing activity should be encouraged through incentives. For instance, paper production and printing facilities. The book should be conceived of as a major instrument to make the culture known abroad. It would be like a marketing tool for making the country known and the culture known, and also working with bookstores and many other stakeholders in order to strengthen the distribution channels. I'm thinking about Mexico, and I imagine it might be similar in other countries. We do have a system of chemical labs that have a distribution and sales channel, that is to say pharmacies. Well, the book production industry should also have that distribution stakeholder, the bookstores. So the publishing houses shouldn't go to schools directly. They should go through the intermediate channels in order to respect everyone's work and the network of book production.
So I believe it is important to have this type of discussions. I thank you very much for your invitation. And I'm in high spirits now because I'm not on my own. I'm not alone. Lots of things are being done everywhere, which is very positive. Thank you so much for the invitation. Yes, I share your joy. John, would you like to say goodbye, a few goodbye words?
Sure. I just wanted to add my congratulations for this wonderful announcement today, and thank you, Cecilia, for that. It's certainly made my day, and I'm going to be discussing a lot of this with my Canadian counterparts as well. And this is what it's all about, isn't it? I mean, I'm glad that our ideas are popular with you, and now we're going to be following the story of the Book Institute very, very closely. I want to come back to one point that Carlos made, that writing is work. This is something that we always try to stress in all of our discussions with government. This is not just about culture, but it is about fairness in labor and compensation, and that must never be lost. Certainly in the during the pandemic in Canada, writers and publishers went out of our way to make our works available, much more easier and more accessible, often for free to readers, because there was a great sort of flowering of interest in reading during lockdown. But obviously that takes away from the income side for our industry, and that needs to be recognized and compensated. So what I would say in conclusion is I would go back to the metaphor that I used of the ecosystem. These things are very delicate and very vulnerable, and so while you build supports like the Book Institute, you want to make sure you're not weakening laws on the other side around compensation for copying and things like that. Everything needs to work together in order for this project to succeed. So thank you very much, everyone.
Muchas gracias, John. Seguiremos en
Thank you very
contacto.
much, John. We will keep in touch surely to keep on thinking about this next step. Ndongolera and Cecilia, would you like to say a few goodbye words as we approach the closing of this session? Yes, Marcelo. Yes, I would like to thank you again. Thank you for your invitation, and Senator Lopez Valverde has sent her apologies for not being here. I believe that our country has an interesting history in terms of cultural policies and book policies. It was Sarmiento who created CONAVIT in 1870. So there we have an interesting milestone in our history. It is not a public expense, it's an investment. And I believe that's also important to remember. We will continue working with all sectors to come up with an interesting proposal. It's been a pleasure to have worked with you, and we will keep in touch for anything you may need. And it's been a pleasure to share this session with the other lecturers. Ndongolera, would you like to say a few farewell words?
I just should say thank you for the invitation and congratulations to Argentina for this milestone. And I've learned a lot, and I think I've bought a list. We don't have Book Institute to see how it works within our area. So thank you very much for the invitation, and all the best. Good night for Istidaki.
Bueno, desde la Unión de Escritoras y Escritores, todo...
The Writers Union is joyful this afternoon. Our thanks to the IAF people, to the Senator, Maria Fernanda, John, Katie, and all the panelists, Carlos and Ndongolera. It's been a great pleasure. And now I'll turn it over to Maria Fernanda for her to close the meeting. Thank you very much. We are all very happy. We leave with a wonderful piece of news with this new initiative in place. We will follow its path with much interest. It's been a great experience to find out what the publishing sector is like in Malawi. It's a golden dream to have all these links to have links that contain grants. Thank you very much for enabling this interaction. I'd like to thank Nieves and Marita, wonderful translation from both of them. Thank you so much. And I hope that we can meet again next year, not just to talk about the Book Institute in Argentina, but also to discuss the similarities between America and Africa, which are two great continents with lots of great creators. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Tanasis. Thank you, Katie, who are behind the scenes taking down notes. Thank you, John, again for being with us today.